Hi, I'm Allie Jackson Jolly. I'm here with Angela Reddock-Wright. She is an employment attorney and mediator out of California. Angela, welcome and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
What do you think employers should know? Employers who, may still have their eye on creating more equitable workplace, but have some concerns about the legal ramifications. What's your advice here?
Well, what my personal advice is to encourage employers to stay the course, right? But I understand that, many companies, as they manage their risk and they manage the legal side of their house, that they do have to think about, as you said, being potential targets for lawsuits. In fact, many have been put on notice. In my world, the law firm world, the person who really spearheaded a lot of the work against affirmative action sent letters, in the summer of 2023 to major law firms, to companies, to attorney generals throughout this, the country saying, if you continue with your DEI programs, that you could very well see a similar lawsuit that we had against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina. So the corporate America was placed on notice. And so they had to take time to evaluate, well, do our programs violate the law? Could they potentially be seen as violating the law? And I would say where companies are protected and organizations are protected is very much like Title IX for higher education. We also have Title VII under federal law for private and nonprofit and public sector organizations. And Title VII, most recently amended in 1964, says that you company, you organization cannot discriminate against individuals in hiring, promotions, or any employment decision with respect to race, gender, disability, religion, and a whole list of other factors depending on what state you're in. In a state like I'm in California, we have a list of about 20 plus protected categories, right? But those are the basic protections. So companies, whether it's through a DEI program or no DEI program, they still have a duty to operate in a way that is fair and that is non-discriminatory when it comes to employment decisions. Now, what DEI programs do, they give companies an added way to enhance the work environment, to be very intentional about making sure their environments are diverse and inclusive and belonging now, to where people from all backgrounds and experiences feel like they belong within those organizations. But at the base level, companies still are held to a standard not to discriminate based on, these long-standing protected categories or protected characteristics.
Yeah, and so where do you think this is all going? So you like painted that narrative really well for us, the like well, if we call it the awakening of corporate responsibility following George Floyd's murder, and then this sort of pushback after the affirmative action ruling. Where do you think this is going? Do you think, and sometimes I think we should say diversity, equity, inclusion instead of those three letters, but do you think there is a place in which diversity, equity, and inclusion is once again embraced and heralded as something that makes corporations better? What's your view on this?
Well, again, I'm biased. I definitely think DEI is important, and I, for one, was very happy when in 2020 we saw so many companies and organizations step up to the plate to commit themselves to that. But we're definitely under attack, and that's without saying, right? It's very clear. And I think where it goes will depend on at least a couple things. So there's definitely a political element to this, right? We are in the middle of a national election, and depending on where that election goes, it will determine what type of policy comes out of the White House and the federal government, even as it relates to Congress, depending on how, what the proportionment of Democrats versus Republicans versus other in Congress ends up being. So that will be critical to determining what happens. That said, we still have a Supreme Court that now is considered majority conservative, meaning, that's the same court that outlawed affirmative action. So even with the change in the presidential tides or Congress, we still have a Supreme Court, whereas they're receiving new cases or deciding to take up whether to take up new cases dealing with affirmative action or challenges to DEI. It's very possible that we'll continue to see for an unknown period of time, as long as the court is conservative, similar decisions come out, related to affirmative action, related to DEI. So I think that we will continue to be under attack for a while, but that there are those companies that are big enough, that are strong enough, that have the dollars, that have the resources, that have stepped, and I won't name them, but there are many of sort of blue bread companies that have stepped up and saying, we are maintaining our commitment to these issues. We're willing to put our money where our mouth is. We're willing to defend ourselves in the litigation that might come, from challenges to our programs. And I think those companies, by virtue of their strength and their willingness to stand on the front lines of these issues, are the ones that create hope that, and so at some period of time, whether it be a year, 5 years, 10 plus years, we will see, the restoration of DEI, DEIB in our companies, in our organizations, and I think the reason those companies have taken that step, are taking such a stance, is because they recognize that independent of where we are politically in this country, that America is almost majority, minority, so to speak, right? A majority diverse, and that we are not, a monochrome of a society anymore, where you can no longer take into account the fact that so many people support our economy, so many people make it possible for these companies and organizations to exist. And so you got to reflect those people, the diversity of those people, in your business model, in how you hire, in how you deliver your services. So those companies are smart also to know that they've got to change and reflect the changing times.
Well, I was going to ask from a legal standpoint, because you're right. It's a number that's tattooed in my brain. 2045 is the year that the U.S. Census says there will be more people of color in this country than not people of color. And so from an industry like media, in which we can only grow audience if we reflect the audience to whom we speak.
Right.
But I think about that in terms of the law. Is there an argument, I guess, I don't want to say around the law, but is there an argument that your business requires a certain kind of intentional hiring, recruiting of diverse people, because that otherwise you can't grow your audience, your consumers? I mean, does
Right.
that
That is a
circumvent
business
that?
necessity, right? To reflect your client base or your customer base. I don't know if that argument has been espoused yet. I imagine, I'm sure in some of the briefing on these issues, there are statistics that do speak to that issue, but I think that's a great argument, and one that should be considered, like the business necessity, the societal necessity, to make sure we're building models, whether they be DEI models or other models, that reflect the society that we live in and that we are becoming very quickly. 2045 is not that far away.
Before we know it, right? Because I was just 20 a day ago, wasn't I? Anyway,
Right, exactly.
now we are out of time. Angela, it was wonderful to have you here. Well, this is a conversation that I am sure will continue on for a while, and I hope to have you back on and continue this conversation with you.
I would be happy to do so. And thank you for having relevant, important discussions on your show. Really appreciate it.